All right. Welcome to another episode of Safe Space Finance. Today, I want to cover all things 529. Um, One of the most common questions I get is about how in the world to save for kids' college. I am a father of a 3-year old. I've also got one on the way this December. Uh, we have a ton of friends that have kids that are in that sort of toddler stage, and everyone's thinking about how do I sort of save for college and approach it the right way. And so since I'm getting so many questions about it, I wanted to go ahead and sort of make an episode about it, talking about four sort of major things. One is, um, should I even use a 529? Like this is something that people have been grappling with. It's actually it's not always so straightforward. Just because you're saving for education doesn't necessarily mean it's not an automatic thing that the 529 is going to be the right thing. And so people definitely have questions about that. People want to know, okay, yeah, if I'm going to use a 529, I've decided that, which state should I even open my 529 in? And then beyond that, it's like once I know that the 529 is sort of the right place for me, it's the right investment vehicle, which underlying investments should I be picking? And then lastly, one of the more like high variance things I've seen is people pay different amounts, people invest different amounts into their 529. Um, I I've asked this question to so many people and I've gotten a different answer every single time in terms of the monthly investment that people put towards their kids 529. And it's such a range from, $100, $200 a month, all the way up to $2,000 a month and $2,500 a month. So I think it depends on who you are and what your goals are for your kid, and sort of the total percentage that you're trying to pay for school. But it is a really interesting thing that there's such variance there. And so what I wanted to do was cover those four topics today, in some more detail, and hopefully you get something out of it and find ways to maybe optimize what you're doing or make your decision finally. So starting with, should I use the 529 as the sort of investment vehicle of choice to save for my kids' college? So the the best thing that I've sort of found for this is to start with a decision framework that Vanguard has created. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you one of the things that I've used in the past. So this is basically saying, how do I make that 529 decision, right? Here's the deal. 529s, again, are not the only way that you can save for your kids' education or even anyone's education, yourself or others. A 529 is special in the sense that it gives you the ability to have earnings that are tax-free, and then you can withdraw those things you can withdraw those earnings tax-free as well. Many of these other investment vehicles do not. UGMAs, UTMAs, general investing accounts, Roth IRAs, etc. Roth IRAs certainly do have tax-free growth, but you can't withdraw the earnings tax-free and pay them towards education. So when we walk down this decision tree, is education one of the goals you want to save for? I think we're here because yes, it is, right? A 529 might be a solid choice, right? Next question. Do you want an account that's just for education savings? The 529 is literally built for education savings. And that's why you get those sort of tax benefits alongside of it. These are not, right? So UGMAs, UTMAs, general investing accounts like general taxable accounts or Roth IRAs are not meant for education specifically. So then the next question in the decision tree is, are tax advantages a top priority for you? And I don't know who answers no to this question. I don't know them, but yeah, tax advantages are super important. So I answer yes. That's one of the biggest perks of 529. You can enjoy tax-free growth on your contributions, and your withdrawals are tax-free too, so long as they're spent on qualified education expenses. So just to summarize that, two incredibly important key features of a 529. One is that you're getting tax-free growth on your contributions. Then two, your withdrawals, when you're taking money out of that account to spend on qualified education expenses, they are tax-free. So super important. These accounts up here, a UGMA, a UTMA, general investing account, these things are not tax advantaged in really any way. A Roth IRA certainly is, right? If you put money into a Roth IRA, you're going to get tax-free growth, and what you see is what you get, and that's great. In fact, with a Roth, you can pull out your contributions, not your earnings, but you can pull out your contributions at any time without a penalty. However, when you want to access those earnings, everything that your compounding interest is giving you, and largely over time, your compounding interest gives you more than your contributions. You will have to pay a penalty on those earnings, and so that's really important to understand. 529s are really designed for education, and so they allow you to basically put after-tax money in and get free growth, and then tax-free growth and tax-free withdrawals as long as it's spent on qualified education expenses. Now, keep in mind too that you are not the only person that can contribute to your child's 529. Other people can contribute. Most of these plans have something called a U-gift feature where your mother or father, so the grandparent of the child, could actually contribute to that account. Anyone could contribute to that account for that child, so long as they wanted to just, give a donation or give a gift. And so that's effectively like money you didn't pay taxes on going into that account, growing tax-free, and then you're withdrawing the earnings, that principal plus the earnings, those gains, while it was invested, tax-free, so long as it's spent on the qualified education expenses. Okay, so then it gets down here. So do you live or pay taxes in the District of Columbia or one of these states? Now, there's a lot of states listed here. In essence, what this is basically saying is that if you live in one of these states or in the DC area, DC, you will most likely, need to use your Region 529 plan, because you're going to get not just this tax-free growth, but you're getting that tax benefit in the form of a tax deduction each year on your income. That's super important. Every single year, from the time that you start this until the time that your child goes to college, you are getting a tax deduction. Just for a frame of reference, in DC, I'm getting an $8,000 tax deduction on my state local income taxes every single year based on contributing to the 529. So it's super important. Generally speaking, if your state offers this and you live in that state, it's highly likely that that's the right choice for you. Now, let's say that you don't live in one of these states. That is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So an example would be like North Carolina. So North Carolina is not in this list, so you would answer no. And then it says, consider investing in the Vanguard 529. You'll get flexible, high-quality investment options, low fees, expert management, and a great way to show the learners in your life that you believe in them. That's cute. So why is it saying you should go with the Vanguard 529? Well, it's because the state of North Carolina, if you live there, is not going to give you both tax features. They will market to you that you are going to get a tax advantage because you're going to contribute money and it's going to grow tax-free. You get principal and earnings that are going to grow tax-free, right? But the second feature of that tax benefit that is pretty common in 529s, which is the tax deduction on state and local income taxes, is not present in North Carolina. That is not part of the NC 529 plan. So that is an interesting predicament. If you're not going to get that particular benefit, then you actually need to make a decision about which state you're actually going to go with, or how you're going to go about that. And that's sort of the next section of the video. But in general, The question is a 529 right for me? And I think largely when you compare it against your other options, like a general taxable account or a Roth IRA or a UGMA, UTMA, I think it makes a ton of sense, especially if you have all these tax benefits. Education is super expensive. Not everybody's going to go to a 4-year university. I see a lot of people going into 2-year community and then rolling into a 4-year. I see a lot of trade schools opening. I see even employer groups like Boeing have started their own sort of training and education programs where they train you specifically to be a Boeing engineer, and then you become a Boeing engineer and you start off with a great salary and you didn't spend a ton of money, you didn't go into debt. All those kinds of things are reshaping the education industry. And I think the education industry just in general is ripe for disruption. But in general, I think a 529 makes a ton of sense. The 529 is, I think, a favored plan from a law perspective. The law keeps changing around what is possible with a 529. It's super flexible. You can use it on K through 12 qualified education expenses. You can roll over 35,000 of it into a Roth IRA. There's all sorts of things that make it a pretty flexible account to use. So that is sort of how I would think through, should I be using a 529 or should I be using a UTMA, UGMA, general taxable Roth IRA? And just to give you some cons here, a UGMA, UTMA is a custodial account that you would open up, and what would end up happening here is when you open that account, you would be able to invest. You would use your after-tax dollars to fund that account. And what would end up happening is at the age where your kid turns 18, they would become the custodian and have full control over those funds. Now, I don't know about you, but I would have to basically keep it a secret from my daughter to guarantee that she wouldn't do something reckless with it. That's a risky proposition. 18 years of savings going into the hands of an 18-year-old. It's hard to know. She's 3 right now. It's hard for me to know if she would have all of the right decision points and data available to make good decisions with that money and not be influenced for other things. A general taxable account is, it's taxed on the way in, taxed on the way out. I don't think that that's the way to go. A Roth IRA, well, you can pull out contributions. I think the biggest con there is that if you use a Roth IRA for this, you're going to ruin the compounding interest that you've set up. You're going to sell out of some of your winners for sure, and then you're going to end up making less than you would have otherwise for your own retirement. And I just don't think that's a smart thing to do. When you have an investment vehicle that could potentially get you tax benefits and all that kind of stuff and is not taxed on the way out for qualified expenses. Okay, so that covers should you use a 529? Those are sort of my opinions there. I'm curious to know what you guys think about that. I'm a big believer, but doesn't mean you have to be. All right, so next one. What we're going to talk about now is which state should I open my 529 in? And I think this does get complex, right? You have you have a lot of different places where you can open a 529. Largely what we just discussed is that if you have a tax benefit in the form of a tax deduction, not just tax-free growth, but a tax deduction because you live in that state and that state offers a 529 with a tax deduction feature, that's probably the right plan for you. And it's a pretty simple decision-making process. However, if you do not live in a state that offers that tax benefit, it does get a little bit more interesting. And for that, I might recommend, again, sort of looking at some of the features that are available in the Vanguard website. So you can see here, they've got a big map. They say the state of Wyoming does not offer a 529 plan. You can browse, all these other plans across the states to see what's going on. They're color coded, so you can see who has the Vanguard 529 plan. That's the state of Nevada. Nevada does not offer a tax benefit, and I think the Vanguard 529 plan, it makes a lot of sense to be there because they don't even have a tax benefit. So might as well use Vanguard. Vanguard Investments and Management. So you could see who offers Vanguard Investments and Management, states with investments that include Vanguard mutual funds, other 529 plans, and states that do not have 529 plans, such as Wyoming. Okay. So you can view the map. You can click on any state. So for example, if I click on Virginia, it'll say, okay, there's the Invest 529 plan at Virginia. You could see, okay, it does have a state tax benefit. And you could even click here to calculate your tax savings if you're interested. You can look at some of the underlying investments. So you can see, Blackstone's in there, UBS Realty, etc. You can get a look at the expense ratios, which is super important. This is going to equate to the amount of fees you're going to pay over the life of the account. And then you can also see their portfolio solutions. Single portfolio solutions and individual portfolio solutions definitely allow you more flexibility if you see a higher number here. So you definitely want to see a higher number here because it's going to give you added flexibility in the way that you can invest. And then the other thing to pay attention to is the minimum initial contribution. So that can be a barrier for some people. Maybe you don't have $3,000 ready to go to spend on a 529 out of the gate, right? So the minimum initial contribution is kind of important. You can see here for Virginia, it's a minimum initial contribution of $10. So that's a pretty low barrier to entry, relatively low expense ratios, et cetera. So this looks like an attractive plan. As I mentioned before, if you're in the state of North Carolina, for example, using the NC 529 plan, you would not have a state tax benefit. So the levers in the decision-making process are really going to revolve around looking at expense ratios. Well, it's all pretty reasonable, but like if you're comparing it against other things, like, so for example, if I'm comparing it against this Vanguard one, that's 0.14%. So you would need to understand which investments you're going to sort of partake in, because each investment is going to have a completely different expense ratio. So for example, if you looked at the individual portfolios and you said, "Oh wow, I like what North Carolina has to offer here. They've got these, maybe there's a U.S. Total stock market one that you really like, but the expense ratio is like 0.3." And then you go over here to the Vanguard and you see a total stock market and the expense ratio is actually, 0.15 or something for a particular thing that gets you similar exposure. Maybe you go with this one, so long as you have the minimum initial contribution ready. So there's a bunch of different factors that you'll want to consider. But in general, that's pretty much what you'd want to go through in terms of your decision-making process for which state am I going to build this plan out for the next, 18 years. The next thing that we kind of want to talk about is which investments do I want to pick for underlying my actual 529, right? Because this is what happens. You usually fund an account, and then it's not enough to just fund an account. You have to actually invest the money once it's in an account. And so what I am typically looking at when I'm looking at sort of investment options is sort of similar to what I'm looking at on a general basis for any sort of investing. But with the 529, it is a little bit special in some ways, because you want to make sure that you understand sort of the general buckets of investment. So the first one is, they call it a target enrollment date portfolio. It's similar to like a 401k when you have like a target retirement date, and it's like, hey, I'm going to retire in this year. I'm going to retire in 2048, and I want the allocation and the balance of my portfolio to sort of be aggressive at first, and then like rebalance towards a much more conservative thing as the closer I get to the year 2048. Similar concept with the enrollment target date portfolios, where it'll start out aggressive, and then over time it will then change to be much more conservative right around the year that your kid is supposed to enroll in school. And so the target enrollment date portfolio is sort of like the easy button of the options. The second one is something called the individual portfolio. And that is what you see almost posted every single place. Every single 529 has what they call individual portfolios. And that's where you're picking, I wouldn't say down to the stock, right? This is much more like you're picking funds, which are combinations of stocks, diversified funds that will target or track some sort of segment of the market. So you might be like U.S. total stock market, or international stock market, large cap, small cap, etc. And so that is sort of the individual portfolio. Um, the third one you'll see is something called a principal portfolio protector or protection. And typically that one is something that basically say, hey, my kid is in school and I need this principal to not go down, right? The equivalent is basically just investing in like putting in like a high yield savings account, right? Like it might accrue just a touch, but it's not going to be earning a ton, but you're protecting the principal from going down. So you have no downside. And so those are the three types of buckets you'll usually see in any sort of 529 account that are made available to you. I think the first decision you have to make is, am I going to go target or am I going to go individual? And if you're going to go target, uh, you know, I think that that's a fair thing to do, right? Like you want it to be aggressive and then conservative. I think that makes a ton of sense. For me, I chose to do individual. And the reason I chose to is because I thought that, and I still think that I can do better than a target portfolio. I have mine invested in the U.S. total stock market right now, and I think it's 95% stocks, maybe 5% bonds or something like that. But in general, I've looked at it and I've tracked it against some of their target enrollment date portfolios, and I'm definitely outperforming their target enrollment date portfolio. And I think that that's largely because I'm concentrating my investments in the U.S. total stock market, which has performed well in recent history. And that could change, and it could, I could run into a situation where that's not the case in 2-3 years, right? But in general, I feel pretty safe choosing my own sort of investments there, and it's really just a personal decision and what matters to you and how much sort of risk you're willing to take on and how active you want to be in the management of your 529. The other sort of things I would consider are historical rates of return. I would certainly look at how are the returns over time. I would definitely look at the expense ratios. This is going to be an account that lives with you for tens of years, 10, 15, 18 years or whatever. And you want to make sure that you're not paying a ton in fees over that time, and especially not doing anything that's got really exorbitant expense ratios, because you actually start to pay thousands of dollars over time if you have high expense ratios on your accounts. The other thing to pay attention to is just allocation. Generally speaking, most people want to do mainly stocks up front, and then have some more bonds, rebalancing and sort of like deepening their position in bonds as they get closer to the enrollment. But just keep in mind that bonds have had bad years too, right? So stocks, bonds, they all have risks. So there's no, as people say, there's no free lunch. But diversification makes a ton of sense. And personally, I think if you went down either path and you just held for 18 years and you dollar cost averaged into these investments, largely, I think you'd end up okay. You'd probably turn 7 or 8% and be okay. The important thing, I think, is just investing early and frequently. Dollar cost averaging is huge. The other thing I'd encourage is get family members in the game, right? Like if people are buying your kids too many toys, tell them to stop buying toys and put a little donation in the 529 for your kid. Now I think comes an interesting question, which is sort of like the most frequent question in even a discussion that I have, and a question I have from many people, which is, how much do you invest in your 529 each month for your kid? Because, I did my own research and I came up with a number and all that kind of stuff, but like, I have never gotten the same number from anyone ever. There is super high variance on this answer, and it's kind of odd to me that there's so much variance between people on this answer. But it's a question that we ask on the show to almost everyone who has kids and has a 529 setup. We definitely want to know how much people are contributing. We're sort of collecting data on that, and we can give some averages and some medians on it. So I think it's kind of interesting. Maybe I'm just geeking out. But anyways, so how much should you invest in a 529? Well, I think I want to show you guys sort of like how I do it, but I'll tell you what I've heard is sort of when people tell me, "Oh, this is how much I invest," I sort of ask a follow up question and I say like, "Well, um, I understand that's how much you invested. How did you get to the number?" And some are like, "Oh, it's just a random number. Like I just, I don't know, I just picked it." Some are like, "Well, it's my circumstance. Like I can't do more than I like did my budgeting. I looked at my finances. I can't do more than, $300 a month or whatever." And then I talk to some people, they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm in 2000 or, whatever, 2,500 a month." And I'm like, "Wow, that's a lot." And they're like, "Well, I want to pay for 100% of my kids' college and, tuition fees, room and board, all of it. Like I want to get it done." And I understand that too. And then some people say like they're maxing it out. And I think like people do get a little bit confused with the gift tax. So there's like the $17,000 gift tax that when you read about a 529, people say there's like the $17,000 gift tax and you can't exceed that. But like, I think technically you can contribute hundreds of thousands of dollars into a 529 and it's not an issue. It's really just about the lifetime gift tax. And that's like millions and 12, $13 million, something like that. So in general, I get a lot of different rationale for why people contribute the amounts that they do. But let's sort of cover how I did it. And I'm going to make this pretty quick, but I just want to show you how I ended up coming to the decision on my number. I made the decision that I was going to try to fund the entire college experience for my child. Now, I think that there's merit in not doing that, frankly. But I think to each his own. So here's an example. Child one, if you have multiple children, you can even add a child, which is great. This is the Vanguard college cost calculator. I think it's a great tool for sort of helping you find a number. You can put in your child's name, their current age, the age that they're going to start college, the years that they will attend college, and then you can choose the current annual college cost. And what's cool about this is that you can actually choose from sort of averages across different types of colleges, whether it be a public 2-year, a public 4-year in-state, public 4-year out-of-state, private 4-year, or a private 4-year expensive, right? You can also choose specific schools, right? So you could go to the state of Alabama and you could like literally choose the exact school you want to send your kid to. I know that there are some people who have really strong ties to universities. So if that's how you're working, that's fine. Me personally, I'm looking to do, as much as I possibly can, right? So I wanted to include room and board in addition to tuition and fees. You could do tuition and fees only if you wanted to. And then I sort of chose like one of the higher numbers, right? So a private school, oh God, like what if she goes to NYU? What if she's super like smart and does well in school, that kind of thing. And then I put in like a monthly. So let's just say I went with 300 a month. And let's say I'm saving, I don't know, 500 a month. Or sorry, let's say my current balance is, I don't know, $1,000, or maybe I did the minimum for that Vanguard 529. It was $3,000. And let's say I'm expecting an average return of 8%. I think that's fair. 7 or 8% is probably conservative. And then the percent that I plan to cover, right? So the percent of the cost that I plan to cover, I'm going to cover 100%. That's my goal. And then the rate of annual cost increase. So here we are adjusting for inflation and trying to predict like how much will the cost of college increase over the next 18 years or 15 years in this case. And so if you look over here to the results, you can see that the blue is how much I'm going to be able to fund. The orange is my shortfall. And so you can see the details down here. I'm going to need $408,000 to cover the cost of room and board, tuition and fees in 18 years for my daughter to go to school. Based on my current savings plan, which is I got $3,000 in principal, I'm going to do $300 a month. It's saying that I could only cover 32% of the estimated total cost. I will have to save an additional $596 a month in order to cover that cost. So this gives you a really simple path to understanding how you can actually get to a fully covered cost of college, right? So like, let's just say I was going to say, okay, well, we'll screw it. I'll just do 900 then. Well, if I do 900, sorry, 896 was the exact number. If I do $896 a month, I will be able to cover the cost of college, right? And so that is how you can actually arrive at a very specific number and feel sort of good about it, right? I do recommend contributing monthly. And so I wouldn't contribute yearly. I think if you contribute yearly, I would recommend having a lump sum up front in each year so that you're maximizing the growth of each year. I think if you do yearly, you're not going to necessarily mirror the market. You're going to be buying in a very specific snapshot in time. And so I think you then want to emphasize time in the market versus if you're doing it monthly, you don't necessarily need to worry about which, day of the month you're doing it. You're getting closer to that dollar cost averaging, which will mirror the shape of the performance of the market much more closely. So, obviously, the more you can get into the account up front, the easier it becomes. So that's really important. If you had $10,000 ready to spend today, you could drop your payment by $61, right? Which is what we're seeing here. So it's really important to encourage people to contribute to your child's 529, family members, friends, etc. Upfront and early, because that will help you reduce your monthly costs. So anyways, that's sort of how I picked an exact number for my 529 contribution. I'm super curious to hear how people have handled their situations. And like I said, there's been a ton of variance as we've asked on the show in terms of the guests we've seen. But just to wrap up, we've covered a lot, right? We covered, should you even use a 529 in the first place? We talked about, which state you should open up your 529 in, which underlying investments should you pick, and how much should you actually contribute? Like, how do you get to that real dollar figure that makes you feel good about, hey, I'm prepared and I've got this, and I'm going to be able to cover the costs, whatever that cost is, 80%, 90%, 50%, 100%. And then, that's sort of all things 529. If you have any questions, feel free to DM us on Instagram at Safe Space Finance. If you're on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment here and ask us anything. Or, if you felt like we left something out, please let us know. But in general, been happy to share with you, and look forward to the next session.